All right, so today we are in Love and Torah part 30. Whole bunch of new people, never heard me before, just said, part what? Why, this is a short one so far. We got 55s and 64s. All right, so Love and Torah part 30. Okay, so let's remember again, because it's been a little while, although of course there's people that are watching this later on, they'll be watching it in order and they'll be like, what do you mean it's been a while? You know, just watch 3, 4, 5 of these in a row. The point that we're covering here is to understand, what love has to do with it. Because, and I'm not going to sing the song, but the thing is, the contrast that we get often from the mainstream when comparing the way we look at things is that you guys are about the law, we're about love. And in the previous 29 parts, we saw that the two of those things are linked, inseparably together. They're not either or concepts, okay? And so the two big commands, as Yeshua referred to, the two great commands, is loving our Elohim and loving each other. And we spent most of the first 20-something parts dealing with loving our Elohim, and now we're starting to focus on loving each other, okay? And we're in Luke chapter 6, and I left off, I believe, around 37. But I want to just recap, just not from the verses, but some of the ideas that I knew were important. One of the things that I've been really clarifying and bringing into the teachings of late is understanding scriptural instruction about the above versus the below, spiritual versus fleshly, earthly versus heavenly. And so we covered a lot of that last part 29. Beginning around verse 20, we start to see the laying out of a contrast between the above and the below, earthly and heavenly, flesh and spirit. In order to do what he asks us to do, and I said this last time, and I'm going to say it again here, we have to change the way we address, act, think, focus from the default that we have, which is the below, the earthly, the fleshly. And we have to then set our minds above and on the above and come into alignment with the above and the heavenly and the spiritual, okay? And so we're starting to see those contrasts. I'm not going to go back and read the sections, but you'll hopefully remember this from part 29, between these things. And then when we get to verses 27 through about 49, we start to see instruction regarding the mindsets and the behaviors. This is the way a fleshly, below earthly person behaves, but this is the way you can behave if you can get your mind on the above, like loving an enemy. Okay? Can't do that down here. We only can do that if we extend ourselves to the mindset that's above. Okay? So there's a lot of that going on in here. We do see the one section where Yeshua actually mentions the word grace, because you would think the way mainstream Christianity talks about grace, that Yeshua talked about it all the time. He didn't talk about it at all. This is like the only place he talks about it. He says, if you only love those loving you, what grace do you get? What favor is it? If you only do good to those doing good to you, what does that get you? Doesn't sound like the way people normally talk about grace. But now if you look at it as merited favor, he would say, look, if you only love those loving you, what does that merit you? I mean, everybody loves those who love them. Everybody does good to those who do good to them. So what, do you want a medal for that? Do you want a big smiley face sticker? What do you want for that? It's when you love an enemy, now you've gone above and beyond what an average person can do. Okay? And so that's what he's starting to try to give us in these guidance. And that's where we kind of came to an end right before, when we stopped there at verse 35. He says, rather love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Verse 36, therefore be compassionate as your Father also is compassionate. That's a verse that goes right back to what we're saying. Do this way here what your Father up there does. Don't just be compassionate the way you think people are compassionate. He says, no, be compassionate in the same way that your Father in the heavens is compassionate. He loved you when you were at enmity to him, when you were an enemy of his. So why would he be asking you to do something he wouldn't do? He's not. He treated you a certain way, then he wants you to love enemies also. Now, loving them doesn't mean that you're, hanging out and, that kind of thing, but it's the way you feel about them. It's what you desire to happen to them, okay? They're in that screwed up place because of the screwed up places they came from. And everybody that came from those screwed up places that raised them and interact. I mean, we're products of all of those inputs. All you know is they're acting like an enemy to you. Well, but out of the abundance of not just the heart gets filled based on your experiences and all of those things that are inputs, right? So out of the abundance of all the inputs, you're going to behave a certain way. And it's no surprise that you behave that way. You know, it's really funny to me. I wasn't even planning to say this, but I think it fits right in here. With all the cancel culture things happening, the thing that's really fits right into what we're talking about here is that most of it is because people don't want to accept that that is what it was then. Now, you may not like that that's being talked about today, but when you read books or watch movies or watch TV shows from a long time ago, there's a lot of what we would call today politically incorrect comments, behaviors, caricatures, whatever it is. But that's where they were then. And changing that, you don't learn the lessons from the time. You don't have anything that you can sit down with your children and explain. It doesn't make any sense to me. Not that we want to hold it up and say, we should be back like the way they were back then. No, but just it is what it is, okay? I mean, we're going to start taking down all of the forefathers of this country, not the Bible, but of the country, take them all down because they all were slave owners at some point. Well, almost everybody here was at that point. It's not saying it's good or bad. Obviously, it's awful. I'm just saying that was the time. Women didn't have a say. They didn't have a vote. That was the time. Times change. So what do we have to wipe out the history so we don't know that there was a time when these things were? Then how do you learn the lessons? Abba shows us all of the dumb things that people did for 4,000 years here. Okay, from Genesis to the end of the Gospels and then all of the journeys of the apostles, we got about 4,000 years. And so in that 4,000 years, cultures changed, mindsets changed, what was thought of as acceptable changed, and he had to come in and give them guidance and say, don't imitate what they're doing, etc. And so this is, when he's saying to us, look, therefore be compassionate as your Father's compassionate, not compassionate as your culture is compassionate or the way your family was compassionate or whatever context you grew up in. No, the way he does it. Separate and above from whatever worldly different pockets here and pockets there do things. Okay? Because we're not in the days, like if you're reading the Torah portions, we're not in the days when in Exodus 21, Yahweh's giving instruction on the right way to handle a slave. Today we'd be thinking, how could a slave be good on any level? But that was then, as far as those people in that world, in that culture, and whatever was going on. We're not then, we're now. I'm not saying things dispensationally, I'm just saying there has to be an understanding that we are dealing with a different world. If we went back there, most of us wouldn't have a slight idea how to live in that world, and neither would they if they came here. Okay? You could not figure out easily some of you think, okay, I homestead or whatever. Most of you would not know what to do without electricity, without a refrigerator, without a stove, you wouldn't know, without a floor. What's your floor? The dirt, the ground, okay? All right? You would not know indoor plumbing, no plumbing. Forget about indoor plumbing, okay? No plumbing. I'm just saying, we would not know how to live in their world. We don't understand all of the issues of their world, where the world was when he started pulling them out. He's calling you out of this world now. He called them out of that world then. Different issues, different challenges, okay? Totally different context. Okay, the context of the world we live in. Look, even in the world we live in, our context here is not the same as maybe you go to another country. Even today, their context is completely different than it is here in the States. And so we have to look to a much more appropriate source for all of us, not our local context or other things, but him. Do things like he does them. That applies to everybody. And there's no debate over what he does. What you do here may be different from what they do in Africa or Europe or in Asia or wherever, right? It could be very different. But he's the same. For them over there, for us over here, whatever it is, right? Okay? So he gives us this verse, 36 says, look, therefore, do what I do. Be compassionate in the same way I'm compassionate. Okay? That's why he says not to be compassionate because your father says as. The understanding of do it in the same way he does it. As he expresses it, we have to imitate that and express compassion. And we're going to get here to Ephesians in a little bit, hopefully today, where he basically starts off with imitate him. It's about imitating our Heavenly Father, okay? Now, then we talked about verse 37 about judging. We're not going to get into that now. We covered it hopefully enough about judging versus judgment. And we're ready now to kick into part 30 here at verse 38. So he says, give. Okay, before he gives any more explanation, he's already telling you that giving is something you're going to need to do. Whatever that means. He's going to tell you how to do it here afterwards, but give. So he starts off very important, give. Okay, that's sort of an emphatic. You are to give. He is a giver. Are we imitating him? He says it's his great pleasure to give us everything. I've talked about this in previous teachings, that we were created to be the receiver of all his giving, but then we're supposed to change and grow into what he is, which means that then we become also givers to others who are receiving. Okay? So he's saying, look, as I'm trying to get you to imitate your Heavenly Father, give, and it shall be given to you. So we're learning about the reciprocity. I talked about this last teaching, okay? Forgiveness is the same way. If you don't forgive others, he's not going to forgive you. I don't think I mentioned it strong enough last time, though, that the worst challenge all of you will have most of the time is forgiving yourself. I talked about that in the forgiveness teaching, but I wanted to make sure to emphasize that again. Some of you struggle mightily with this whole forgiveness thing, and you don't realize your hardest problem you have is forgiving yourself. And you wonder, I just feel like he's not forgiving me, but I forgave everybody, whatever. Yeah, but did you forgive yourself? A lot of depression out there over people that can't forgive themselves. Okay? You've got to be able to forgive yourself. If you know you did everything required, then the next step is, right, own it as doing everything that's required, owning it and fixing it. Now, if you can't fix it, you at least repent. You did everything required. The last part, though, is the hard part for a lot of you, releasing it. Right, I told you, own it, fix it, let it go, release it. You can't move forward holding on and staying in this, but I did this awful thing. We all do, at different times. But you got to move forward at some point. Or all you're going to be is depressed and suicidal or whatever else. I mean, and just miserable and make everybody around you miserable. Abba says, I want you to live and have life more abundantly. Not I want you to live, realize what a loser you are, and then be depressed the rest of your life. Okay? Because every one of us, don't get mad at me, we're all losers trying to become him. Okay? But we start off recognizing, hopefully at some point, because we were strutting around thinking we were great, some of us. All right, then we realize, whoa, I wasn't so great. Not in his eyes. But he wants me to become that, shows me how, tells me how, gives me guidance, gives me teachers to help me. So I know that's where I'm headed, so there's no reason to be depressed. There's no reason to be all wallowing in last year and last month and 25 years ago and all this other stuff. It's time to let that all go and live. Okay? I watch the news. They give minimal lip service to the fact that with these lockdowns and all the things that have happened, especially with the schools, just how much depression and mental health stuff is going on. And by the way, that's only up 87%, 250%. That's not a big deal? Because without the right help, these people never get out of that. And they just drug them up, and that's the end of it. They don't ever find their way out. So while Yahweh is trying to show us and tell us, look, here in this case, Yeshua is instructing, and he's saying, look, this is this is that, and everything else. And yes, Paul and others get in your face and tell you what a loser you used to be and how you were an enmity and you were an enemy to the Creator and you had nothing, no hope. You were not part of the covenants like in Ephesians 2. All of those things only to find out, but he tapped you, popped your bubble and said, but you can go from there. From being in the muck and the yuck and the dirt, you can go to being a child of the living Elohim. Okay? But that's only going to be doable if you understand the two great commands. You have to learn to love him. Part of that's taking correction from him, and how to love each other. And the only way you're going to do that correctly is to become like him. Let this mind, I always go back to Philippians 2:5. You guys should know what that is, right? Let this mind be in you, the mind of Yeshua. You have to start letting him guide you so you think like him. You know, they used to have the WWJD bracelets. That was stupid, okay? I'm just saying it because people don't know what would he do. So what would he do? No. You want to say, what would he think about this? Then you'll know what to do. What would his thoughts be about this thing I'm thinking of doing or not doing? What is his mind said about this thing? Then you'd know what to do. I mean, we do know, I did a teaching called, What Did Yeshua Do? As opposed to what would he do? Well, we know what he did. And we're also told to imitate him. So let's focus on what he did and imitate it. But if you have the mindset, see, when you guys come to counsel with me, you know what you're asking me? What's the Father and the Son's mindset on this thing? We're looking for guidance. And you're hoping that I would have that insight, that I would be submissive to that voice to get the insight. So it's about seeking a mindset, okay? So he's telling us, look, if you would go through all of these things, and he's kind of dealing with our flesh and everything, and then he says, look, give. And he's saying, I know a lot of you are reluctant to give. And I'm not talking about money or thing. It could be anything, your time, your compassion, your patience, all the things that are of the fruit of the Ruach. Give your love, your joy, your peace, your give. Okay? So he's going to give you an incentive. He says, give and it shall be given to you. So if you're missing something in your life, try giving it. And you might just get some of it back. You know, there's a really great book. It's a really tiny book. I got it a lot of years ago called Try Giving Yourself Away. All right, just write that down, look it up. It's a little paperback, you know, not very long. I mean, I'm talking one of those thin, 60-page books or whatever it is. It's called Try Giving Yourself. And it talks about finding ways to give of yourself, and it doesn't necessarily cost you anything. You don't have to have money to do it. Okay? And here he's telling us, if you are to give, it shall be given to you. Not only is it going to be given to you, but a good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over, shall be put into your lap. You know what's funny? I really didn't understand that verse until the first time I went to like a Baskin-Robbins, like an ice cream store, and I ordered like a quart, or a half gallon, so they had a scoop, and they would put it in, they would tap it against the counter to get it all to go. They would press it down, shake it to make sure there weren't any air bubbles, and they'd give me a full container. I said, so I see what they're talking about, because you get so much more when you shake it, press it, knock it, all the things, just to make sure you fill that thing there's nothing else in there but what you put in there, right? There's no air bubbles, there's no gaps. Somehow that connected for me. I could say, oh, that's what he talks about when he's talking about, because people would buy stuff in those days and they would fill up your container with it. And sometimes you might feel a little shortchanged if they just kind of scooped it in there and it was just kind of all these gaps and everything else. But if they were putting it in there, tapping it down, pressing it down, shaking it to make sure that thing is full, you're getting to overflowing. Okay? So he's telling you that what you're going to receive if you give is not just that you're going to receive. It's going to be pressed down, shaken together, running over. That's going to be put in your lap. And why? Because you can't outgive him. Okay? Remember, we reap what we sow. And I don't want to sound like the name and claim it guys who say, well, if you put your $1,000 seed, he's going to give you all $5,000 back. That's not the way that works. We're talking about giving out of your heart, whatever that is, time, patience, love, whatever. you're going to receive it back. Look, I know someone that I'm confident because of the giving that was given to me when I was sick, they received a certain amount of healing. Okay? It wasn't intended. It wasn't, I'm doing this to get that. Okay? But it was what was done. You can't outgive him. Now remember, this is still in the loving each other part. He's talking about we're not talking about tithes and offerings here. We're not talking about giving to him at this point. We're talking about giving like him, in like manner, giving to each other. Okay? Give, and it shall be given to you. And so then Yeshua, verse 39, and he spoke a parable to them. This is now going to tithe. He's been telling them different mindsets, the above and the below, and the earthly and the fleshly, and the spiritual and the heavenly, all that stuff together. Now he's going to say, okay, I've told you about the different places, the different mindsets, how to apply that in certain areas, but I'm also going to let you know that there's a real challenge here in terms of who you're listening to and how you're being guided and instructed. He spoke a parable saying, is a blind able to lead a blind? Shall they not both fall in a pit? As a taught one, he says, a taught one is not above his teacher, but everyone perfected shall be like his teacher. This is really, before we get to the splinter in the eye, this is a very important little section. We have to remember that you don't know all that you don't know yet. And as you learn a little, we have a tendency to think we're now experts because you know a little, all right? I can't tell you how many people I hear out there thinking they know Hebrew, never took a Hebrew class in their life, okay? But they heard other people talk about it and other people talk about it, and then it's just, and so on and so on. It's like the telephone game, right? Where one person whispers in the ear or something, and it goes down a line of 30 people, and then the last person, whatever they've got, is nothing like the first person got, okay? And this is what, by the way, you see 90% of what you see posted on the internet when you look up things is somebody posted something who then reposted. It's like retweeting things, right? And then reposted and repost. And we have no idea who did it originally. Where in the world do they get that source from anyway? We got the whole world keeping 6 feet distance. There's no science anywhere that ever talked about that. Some kid actually did it from a science project and somebody latched onto it, and that's where it came from. I'm not kidding you. Okay, the social distancing thing, they don't have any science. They've tested and seen. If I cough, I can reach everybody in this room if I aim at you. What is 6 feet going to do? I'm saying if you sneeze, if you cough, that'll travel a good distance. But yet, this is what we find on the internet, right? You start looking up spiritual things, Bible things, Torah-related things, and you read stuff and you're like, oh, but it said all this. What do you mean it? Who wrote it? Where did it come from? What's their expertise? What's their qualification? Because otherwise what you end up with is that you're blind and you don't even realize that you're following another blind person. And you're both going to end up in the pit. And you got to be careful with that. Question came up today, comes up at every Q&A to a certain degree. Well, what do we do when I find, this or that on another teacher or in a book or on the internet, whatever? I said, first of all, if you have a teacher, like a teacher, that's your teacher, anything that you find, you should run by your teacher if it's at all confusing you or not in line with what your teacher has told you. The challenge, I know, is our emotional discomfort and fear with trusting anybody that much. Having a teacher that you can go to. Because you should have had that relationship with your parents. Most of us didn't. That you can go safely and say, this is something I just experienced in the world. I don't know what to do with it. It doesn't seem to match things you've taught me. And then most of us are afraid we're going to get a smack or something, okay? Or ignored or just, neglected or some other thing like, get away from me, I'm busy, or whatever it is. But this is a real problem. In other places in your scripture talks about people being tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. In other places it talks about anti-messiahs being here already. Like even when they were in the Bible times, they said the anti-messiahs are here already, teaching things that are not what Messiah would teach. If that's real, and it is, but if you embrace it as real, then you should have great concern with all the things out there that you may get touch your fingers on and start deciding to read and put into your system. Then again, this is not culture saying you can only listen to one. Do whatever you want to do. I'm just giving you the warnings and the cautions. It is not safe to just run around and get all of that stuff going on without somebody there to say, hold on, you're going way off course here, okay? Do your own study. Do whatever you need to do. Just be cautious to know that Scripture tells you could be a blind being led by a blind. You end up in a pit. You could be tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine because you found something, but this person's so scholarly. Well, maybe they are, maybe they're not. I know a few that claim to be scholarly that are self-scholarly. Okay? If they know more than you think that they are smart and they're right and this and that and the other thing. You used to have this problem in the martial arts. I just pissed off and screwed. Everybody online is all like, he talked about martial arts. In another life, I was a black belt that had a school, okay, in 87. And I can tell you, okay, in the martial arts, if I knew more than you, I could go out to any store, buy a black belt, make you think I'm a teacher. If you don't know anything and I know something, you don't know how little I know. All you know is I know more than you. And as long as I can find some way to keep staying one step ahead of you, you'll never know. Okay? I remember my teacher telling me how he stopped going to tournaments because he was tired of walking into the black belt room, where they would hang out before the tournament and see a bunch of ex-students that never got past green belt with him all walking around in black belts. Because you all know you could just go online and buy one, right? There's no certifying body that you're required to go through to make sure that anybody could buy one and put one on. You could open a school, claim anything you want. There's no regulatory covering or anything like that to make sure. Okay? But that's the thing, though. This is the same problem you have when you go on the internet, you go anywhere looking for information. You really don't know what these people know, where they're coming from, if they're anointed or not. You're going to have to really vet them out, And people say to me about what's your background. Just listen to the teachings. And over time, you're going to have Abba and the Spirit tell you or not tell you, okay? But that's why you have to vet these people out. You may hear one teaching, go, that sounded really great. Then you go read 3 more teachings and realize they're this, that, or the other thing that you already know is wrong, okay? But you didn't hear that in the one teaching you heard first. But then you'll listen to another one, you find out that they're dealing with pre and post, whatever, rapture stuff, they're dealing with Trinity stuff, they're dealing all grace stuff. Whatever it is that you already know is incorrect there, but you didn't get that in the one teaching that you first found. Okay? You got to vet people out. I've got 500 teachings online. Anybody can vet out whatever they want. The teachings all are there to stand for themselves. Okay? But you have to understand, Yeshua said this for a reason. There is a potential for you to end up in a place where let's just make sure blind doesn't get taken too far. You're ignorant of something, right? There's some area, not necessarily your whole life, where you don't know what you don't know. And then you find somebody who also happens to not know what they don't know, and now both of you are in trouble. Okay? This is a real thing, which means you need to be aware of it and always have that in your mindset as you go and do what you do. It's a warning. It says, look, is a blind able to lead a blind? Now, remember, he's also walking this through with all the things happening, because if you go back to the beginning of the chapter, what's happening at the beginning of the chapter? It says, it came to be on the Sabbath when they went through some grain fields that the taught ones were plucking the heads of the grain and eating them. They were rubbing them between their hands, getting the grain parts and the edible parts and eating them. And of course, some of the Pharisees came and said, why are your students doing what's not right to do on the Sabbath? Of course, there's no place that says anywhere that that's wrong to do on the Sabbath. And Yeshua then gets into a whole little discussion with them. So he's saying again, you can end up with this leadership where they're actually blind because they don't know what they don't know. So let's make the word blind there. It's not just that they're wrong. They don't know what they don't know. They haven't understood that they've allowed Talmudic writings to be elevated equal to Torah. Because the Talmud tells you you can't pluck the grain and eat it. The Torah never says that. Torah says you can't harvest. Okay? But if I walk up to, in the area where I grew up, we had a pear tree in the backyard, and it's Sabbath, and there was a ripe pear, and I walked over and plucked it to eat, no big deal. If I went there and said, wow, there's about 30 of them, and went and got a box and started pulling them all down, that wouldn't have been okay. Okay? But if I went and grabbed one, because I was hungry and wanted to eat it, that's not breaking Shabbat. And so we had to go back now to the context. The context is this attack that comes in the beginning of the chapter. And now he's like, listen, you guys be careful listening to these Pharisees because they don't know what they don't know. Now, they're right about things because he tells you in another place, I think it's Matthew 23, he says, when they sit on Moses' seat and they're teaching you what Moses said, do what they say. That stuff is correct when they're teaching you Torah. But when they're confusing what's Talmud and Torah and making it as if it's Torah, let's be careful we're not ending up in a pit. Okay? There's our context there. Okay, so as he's going through all of this, then he gets to, and why do you see a splinter in your brother's eye, but you're not aware of the plank in your own eye? Well, doesn't that come from the same place if you don't know what you don't know? You think you know, but you don't. Because I think I know enough to judge you. Well, meanwhile, I look like a raging hypocrite because I got my own giant plank coming out of my eye. Okay? We had a lady one time, I tell this story all the time, who put like a neon green rubber, some sort of band over her head with a tent peg in front of her eye. And I couldn't tell what it was from the podium. Later, I came after the lectern, and I went down after services, and she said she's trying to learn this verse. She literally had this wooden tent peg kind of half blocking her view. She said she was having a real problem judging people and not understanding that little speck in theirs compared to the plank in hers. I said, okay, if it works for you, great. It was... Some people, you got to go to what you got to do. Don't care what anybody, I give her a lot of credit. She didn't care what anybody thought of it. I need to learn this lesson. I don't care if I look stupid or ridiculous or people are going to laugh. I need to learn this lesson. I applauded her for that. Okay? But this is what we do, though. We don't take all of this stuff that he's saying. We're not taking the idea of bringing the above into the below, the spiritual and the heavenly into the earthly and the fleshly. We do is we take what we take and then we use it as a weapon. We start looking at everybody else. Oh, I see what so you're like that, huh? Oh, you're doing those things. You shouldn't be doing that. I think you got enough on your own plate to keep you plenty busy than to worry about everybody else. Okay? And this is not how we love each other. How do you love each other when all you're doing is, scrutinizing, examining, and just your eyes are on them and you're paying attention, and it's not your job. Okay? Our job is to love them. Now, if you remember, I've taught this many times. Correction, right, has to come out of the right relationship. Okay? If you're going to give correction, you can only give correction out of a relationship. In other words, my brain went to another thing quickly enough. I want to say that Yahweh, notice he doesn't correct everybody. He corrects those he's in relationship with. Okay? He lets the world go off and do whatever the world wants to do. They don't have a relationship with him. Correction comes out of relationship. I can correct my son, my daughter, my wife, right? Mine. I can't go up to your wife, your daughter, your son and correct them. They're yours, they're not mine. Now, in a context of me being the rabbi and this being the congregation, if something was happening here that actually fell under that level of relationship, not mom, dad, not whatever, but that level of relationship. Because being rabbi doesn't mean it's the same as being parent or spouse or any of those things. Then I might have the opportunity to go over and say, hey, you need to stop that. All right? But you have to first make sure that whatever you're thinking, doing, judging, all that stuff, which you're supposed to not judge anyway, is coming out of a right relationship for that thought. Otherwise, you should be thinking, I need to let that go because I don't have that relationship. I've had a lot of people come up to me over the last 20 years of ministry telling me that they're trying to correct me on this, that, or the other thing, and I look at them sometimes like, I don't have that level of relationship with you. Why do you think that you have enough of a relationship with me to feel comfortable to say the things you just said to me? And think that I'm going to who are you? I don't mean like, who do you think you are? Like who? I mean like, who are? I don't even know these people mostly. They'll find me, they watch the videos, they'll send me a letter. I don't know who they are. How do you take correction from somebody you don't even know? Okay? It's got to be relational. It has to be. And so when he says, look, how do you go ahead and look at these things like, all right, the splinter in the eye and all this other stuff? Well, if you're going to talk to your brother even about the splinter, nothing wrong with that if you have the right relationship. But you have to have that relationship. And by the way, let's use a little bit of a twist on what I've said, that you don't get to decide whether or not you have a relationship with him. He gets to decide. Do the same thing with people. Don't just assume you have a relationship with somebody unless they actually feel the same way. You may think you have a level of relationship with somebody that you really don't have. Okay? And so be clear that if you're going to get into anything corrective, you must really have that level of relationship so that otherwise it'll never be received. Okay? It'll never be received. Okay, and I realized I actually skipped over verse 40, which I didn't really get into as much as I should, so let's just go there real quickly. A taught one is not above his teacher, but everyone perfected shall be like his teacher. There has to be a proper respect for the vertical structure. Okay? You cannot, and this is where this happens all the time. Somebody says, oh, that guy's so great, he's a great teacher, I love this teacher, I listen to the teachings, but then all of a sudden, the teacher does, says, teaches, or whatever, something that you don't agree with, don't respect, don't like, whatever it is. Well, depending on how you respond to that, you could be elevating yourself above that teacher. Now, some of you have had teachers realize they were wrong and you just moved on. That's not elevating yourself above that teacher. It's how you treat that teacher directly and how you talk to others about that teacher. Are you acting like you're above them? Have you elevated yourself in the way people are hearing what's going on to that place? All right? Because sure, all of us have had bad teachers, and we've all recognized that at some point and walked away. Just be careful how we treat them and how we are you elevating yourself above? It's like I love the people that come to me and say, oh yeah, I've been listening to you for a couple years now, and yeah, you're mostly right about most things. Gee, thanks. I'm glad who are you? I'm glad I got your approval that I'm right about most things. Now, you understand what I'm saying? That's not a respectful way to talk to a teacher, okay? Now, if you are a teacher and you're talking with another teacher, there's a right way to talk peer-to-peer. Problem is, you have to be actually peer-to-peer. We had a guy that came to our congregation for a little while many years ago who thought we were peer-to-peer, and we were never peer-to-peer. But in his mind, he was this big international teacher guy, whatever, which he never was, all right? And so he went around telling everybody that we were like peer-to-peer. But we weren't. And that's not me with any ego. I'm just telling you, you have to understand, whether you actually, it's like, look, if I took some first aid classes and you're a nurse or a doctor, we're not peer-to-peer. Okay? I may know a little bit about wounds and bandaging and stuff, but I didn't take the schooling you took. So we're not peer-to-peer. Okay? And so there has to be a respect for that. And so this is something that, again, let's look at verse 40. A taught one is not above, what's the next word? His. See, the assumption is that you have a teacher. If you don't have a teacher, you need to find a teacher. That's Ephesians, again, chapter 4, the fivefold ministry, where they're supposed to be teachers, and you need them to get to the point where you are in the fullness of the completeness, etc., the measure of Yeshua. okay? And so let's understand as we go through all this, again, this is not to say teachers don't ever make mistakes and teachers are perfect in any way. He says, be careful. A taught one's not above his teacher, but everyone perfected shall be like his teacher. You're supposed to find a teacher that you're then trying to emulate. That's called, what's the word for that? Come on, what's the word for that? Discipleship. Who said that? Rebbitzin, good job. Okay? All right? Okay? Oh, hey, listen, anytime I can give my wife accolades, it's wonderful. All right. Okay? Score a few points. Okay. This verse is talking about discipleship. A taught one, a disciple, okay, is not above his teacher, but everyone who's going to reach that, and again, perfected means filled with integrity, reaching the fullness and the completeness of the goal of what the teacher's trying to get you to, is going to happen when they become like their teacher. So Yeshua said, I'm the perfect student of my Father. I am like him. You see me, you see him. Then he taught a bunch of students and sent them out to do the same thing with other people. He didn't say just set up classrooms and teach. He said make disciples. Discipleship relationship is a much more intimate relationship than just a teacher with 30, 40 students sitting in a classroom, okay? There is enough relationship for correction. There is a respect. You know, I've had to say this in other classes where we're talking about discipleship, and somebody started to argue with me, and I said, just so you know, if this was real discipleship, this would never work because you don't argue with your teacher. We can discuss, we can disagree, but once the teacher says, but this is the way it's going to be, that's the way it's going to be. You don't argue with your discipler. Oh, but that sounds dangerous and cultish. Well, it's only because it's been done so badly. If it was done right, it's actually the best way to finally grow forward. Why are we not really growing forward 2,000 years since Yeshua and all of this? Because we really haven't had the discipleship thing go forward like he sent them out to do, because right away the Roman Empire and others snuffed them out as fast as they could. And so this is the rebirthing of starting to bring some discipleship in. I know a lot of you are like, yeah, but Rabbi, you still haven't started the program yet. It's not easy to do when everybody's scattered everywhere and we have to have the space and the funds and everything else. Those days, they just lived together. They went from place to place. They would go rent a space. They'd go and they just lived together. And we can't do that today. There's no way to set that up. All right? And so we're trying to figure out what's the best way to finally bring this. Now, my best thing that I could do at least is give you the teachings that would be discipleship teachings. The kinds of things you would get through discipleship. The next level is to start talking to me if I'm your teacher and getting the counsel. Notice I said getting the counsel, not like, receiving information and deciding if you like it or not. But getting the counsel, applying the counsel, trusting that it's Abba, not this man that you're interacting with. Oh, that's scary. Well, yeah. That's why nobody does it. They're too afraid. Or I shouldn't say nobody, but so few. And he's saying, look, I'm asking you, he's going through this process, I'm asking you to do a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't seem to go congruent with the way you normally would think. You know why? Because down here, in the below, the world, the flesh, etc., that's not the way we would think it would work. Because people will take advantage. People will abuse you. People will do this. People will, yes. Fleshly, worldly, earthly stuff will do all of that. Find yourself a teacher who's going to apply things in the above mindset. Counsel from an above mindset. Teach from an above mindset. Oh, no, that doesn't make him perfect. He's still a person living in the below. Look, even Moses, the humblest of men, popped his cork and struck the rock. I'm just saying. So that's Moses. So don't hold anybody up to any higher standard than that. If Moses could have a problem, certainly any human being could have a problem. All right? Okay, let's continue here. He says, and why do you see the splinter in your brother's eye but are not aware of the plank in your own eye? Or how are you able to say to your brother, let me take out the splinter that is in your eye, not seeing the plank in your own eye. That's even worse. It's bad enough that you walk over and go, I saw what you were doing over there, but then you want to fix it, you want to straighten it out, you want to take the splinter out, he says, what makes you think you're qualified to do that? If you weren't qualified to get the big giant plank out of your own eye, you are not ready to take a splinter out of anybody else's eye. Which, we all have enough planks that, we could fill like a Home Depot. So that'll keep us busy for a long time, okay? He says, hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you shall see clearly to take out the splinters in your brother. In other words, and you may even realize it's not even a splinter and you saw it wrong. The key word there is clearly. You'll see clearly. So what he's telling you is you cannot see your brother correctly until you deal with the planks in your eye. So you're not qualified, okay? You've got this filter, we'll call it a plank. I mean, you can't see through a plank, but imagine you had these big glasses with all these filters, and whatever you're looking at is going to look different because of the way you're emotionally, immaturity levels, development levels, your growth levels, where you're at. And then as you peel these layers away, like those glasses, you know how they have like lots and lots of little things you can pull away from them? Eventually you can see clearly and go, wow, when I first looked, that's not what I saw. That didn't change, you changed. It still was what it was, but you couldn't see because you had too much emotional garbage, immaturity, PTSD, abuses, all kinds of junk that didn't allow you to see things the way they are. I've talked to you about us all walking around in our, delusion bubbles. Some of you think, well, he gave me eyes to see and ears to hear, so I don't have a delusion bubble. Not in that area, maybe. What about all the other areas of your life that you're still walking around in a delusional bubble? If you're not seeing the world the way it is, that's called a delusion. And all of us struggle from time to time in different areas of our lives where we're just not processing reality correctly. And it's not because we're, unable to do it just because we're not smart enough or this or that and the other. It's because we have too many things filtering what the input is. And we are only responding to what we think we're seeing or experiencing. I'm going to say that again. You respond not to what is happening. You respond to what you think is happening. Somebody earlier today said they like when I do Messianic life coaching. Okay? I'll say that again. Every time you respond to stuff, you need to remind yourself, I may not be responding to actually what's happening. I may be filtering it through filters and responding to what I think is happening and what I'm judging it and the conclusions I'm jumping to and all the other things that are triggering, even though that may not be what's happening, okay? And some of you, if you've had trauma, okay, I'll give you an example with my wife. And this is, my daughter broke her arm several years ago. Then a few years later, something happened where she fell and she knew it might have been the arm. She responded the same as when she broke it because it took her right back there. It was a triggered trauma response. So that's not a negative on her. We all have these things where you're now going to think, oh, did she break it again? Because it takes you right back there, even though it was a much lesser. She just fell and it bruised it a little bit. But you don't pick on the person for responding that way. You realize they're responding because there's a trauma that triggered. Guess what? Every reaction you have to everything around you potentially could have a trauma trigger or some other emotional trigger that then skews what you're looking at so you're not seeing it correctly. That's what Yeshua is talking about here, okay? All those planks are basically things that will cause you to not see reality correctly. But you can't just decide to try to look, unless you get the lenses off, it's still going to look what it looks like to you. And even if I come up to you and tell you that's really not what's happening, you're going to argue with me because you see it the way you see it. It takes time with counsel, healing, and growth to get those lenses out and those filters out. The planks, get those planks out of your eye. Because I've had many a debate in counsel sessions with people when I've had to say, but that isn't what happened, and that's not what's happening. But they're filtering it through. the damage, the hurt, the pain, the triggers, all of that emotional, experiential junk. And that's their reality now. It's not reality, it's their reality. We call that a delusion, okay? And in their reality, all of this stuff is happening. And sometimes I have a husband and a wife, and I'm counseling them, and they're talking to each other, and they're not living in reality. Because I know what might be real is when they agree on something, okay? Because that's probably what really happened. They agree, it's probably what happened. But sometimes the stories are so different, you wonder, were they actually talking about each other? Well, you guys, was this actually the person that did that? Because it's such a different story. But they're both coming from emotionally different places, different traumas and dramas in their life, different triggered responses. And so, that's why you get one that's totally freaking out, and the other one doesn't understand why. And by the way, the one that doesn't understand why may be the one with the bigger problem, because there maybe was a real reason for the person to be freaking out, but the one with their drama, trauma, and everything else has now become numb to even recognize that there was legitimate. So it could be either one. But when one is flipping out and the other one's going, I don't get it, there's a real disconnect. And we've got plank issues that we got to figure out what they are. And often it's both. Either over-responding or under-responding, or just responding inappropriately to the actual situation. How are you going to love me? How are you going to love each other? How are you going to love your neighbor as yourself if you don't recognize first that until you clean up all the junk, you can't see them correctly? Okay, I'll say that again. Until you clean up all that junk, you have to accept the truth that you cannot actually see the other person correctly. Well, can you believe so-and-so? If you ever saw a sentence like that, you're already in a bad place. Did you see what so-and-so posted this? Or did you see that? Or did you hear? All of a sudden, you're ignoring all those planks. And all you're doing is looking at everybody's splinters. Be careful with all that. Oh, but I'm just trying to help them. We've talked about that plenty too. Just because you think you're helpful doesn't mean you're being helpful. Okay, they've got to think you're being helpful for you to be helpful. All right? But let's understand, all the stuff Yeshua is talking about is dealing with an internal problem. Okay? So he says here, again, he said, hypocrite, first take out the plank out of your own eye, and then you shall see clearly to take out the splinter from your brother's eye. Now, he says, for a good tree does not yield rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree yield good fruit. Now, you could start there and totally miss the connection to this previous stuff. He's saying is, you can't get a good result coming out of a rotten place. If you can't see through the plank, you're not going to get a right result. Why? Why is that? Well, because you can't see it correctly. How can you do it if you can't see it correctly? Okay? Okay, let's say I want to trim my beard, okay? And I'm pick up these set of glasses that actually shift everything an inch to the left or an inch to the right or even a half an inch, and I start shaving. Do you think my beard's going to look right? Because the filter I'm looking through, and by the way, I'm going to be looking, and it's still going to look fine to me for whatever reason, and then you're going to come up to me and tell me, oh my gosh, what did you do? I'm like, what are you talking about? Because through my glasses, it looks perfect. See, but if they're still rotten, and by the way, that doesn't mean you're rotten. It means that there's stuff that's caused you to rot inside, and you look at things wrong, and you treat people wrong, because this is the condition inside that needs to be cleaned up and made into good, healthy. All right, we're very unhealthy and very toxic people. And I know a lot of people talk about, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, a lot of people talk about, well, I'm looking at the signs, and it looks like Yeshua might be here next Thursday. I'm like, with all this toxicity is going to just be changed in a twinkling and be in the forever body with all this toxicness? People look at me sometimes like, why are you so sure he's not coming at blood moons or this thing and that? I say, because I'm looking at the body. We're not ready for a forever body as toxic as we are. You do that, that would be hell. Spending forever with all the toxicity that we have as a body. Okay? We need to heal all that, become, what he talks about here, a good tree that yields good fruit, not a rotten tree. Because some of us, when I read that, they're thinking it has to do with being a bad person or a good person. I'm talking about it has to do with when you see a tree that's rotten, what do you see? Inside the tree, it's rotted. The inside. The fruit then become bad because there's something wrong inside the tree, in the trunk, in the roots, right? It's in the branch, there's rot. And most of us have some of that kind of a problem internally on some level, whatever the issues are. And it's because of every experience you've had in your life. All the things that you've experienced and, more importantly, how you interpreted the experience. Okay? Because same person and another person can have the same experience, like two different people, but interpreted differently. And so it will cause a different response in how they end up on the path that they end up on, even though they both had the exact same experience. Okay? So we need to understand when he says here, look, a good tree doesn't yield rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree yield good fruit. So you can't really yield good fruit till you get rid of the plank and you start actually figuring out how to get your insides healthy. Okay, go back to, what teaching I want to go to? What are you thinking? Or one of the ones that was talking about the mindset, okay? You've got to work on how you think, and then emotions get attached to it, then it gets in your heart, and then it's going to yield fruit or action, okay? And we've got to get a hold of that. That's why he says take every thought into captivity. But now, not just captivity like, well, I need to take that thought and just throw it away and never think about it again. No, it's about take the thought and recognize, is this an appropriate thought or not? Why am I thinking this thought? Is it because I'm healthy? Is it coming out of a toxic part of me? What am I choosing to do with it? Because you have to understand that all of us is suffering from a toxicity problem. Okay? Some of us have broken relationships with each other, longer term or shorter term, because you couldn't take the toxicity anymore. Not realizing you're just as toxic in other areas. Just the person that you're dealing with isn't affected by that type of toxin, but other people are. So they're very happy to stay friends with you, but you're not happy to stay friends with them because their particular toxic level is affecting you. All right? But then we get back to the plank and the little twig there, right? The little splinter. All you're seeing is their toxicity. You're not seeing your own. All right? He said, for each tree is known by its own fruit. For they do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from bramble bush. Okay, so when people are observing you, people are seeing you, they're going to hopefully recognize it's not just your talk so much, although talk could be a fruit, but it's your actions. Billy talked a lot about this in one of the teachings recently, about good fruit. All right, so you have that good fruit. He said, but the key here is you're going to be known by your fruit. Okay, let's go back to the teachings that I did a little while ago. We were in John 15 talking about the branches and the fruit and the gardener and the vineyard and the whole thing. The fruit is at the very end of the branch, which is attached to the trunk of the thing and goes down into the roots. And so if you have rotten insides, toxic insides, what kind of fruit do you think you're going to get? Is it going to taste sweet? Is it going to be good? Or is this going to be like, something's wrong with this fruit? Okay? So it's very important that we understand, but you're going to be known. You'll have a reputation. You're going to be known by your fruit. The good man brings forth what is good out of the good treasure of his heart. And the wicked man brings forth what is wicked out of the wicked treasure of his heart. For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. I've rephrased that for you. Out of the overflow of all the inputs you put in there, your actions and your words and everything come out of that. Change the inputs over enough time and the outflow will be different. Okay? All right, I came to realize in my 30s, although I've not done as much job as I wanted to change that eating pizza every day didn't get the shape of body I was wanting. Now, if I changed that input I would get a different output or result. Okay? Now, of course, at 18, it didn't seem to matter. I had a metabolism that didn't matter. Okay? Now, I want you to really embrace that example, because when you were at a certain point in your life, you did a certain amount of things, you had certain inputs, and it didn't seem to matter. Now you have to recognize that while those inputs didn't seem to hurt anything where you were at that time, they may be hurting you where you are now. Okay, take that parable. That's my parable, I guess, or analogy for you, okay? The parable of the pizza. All right? I mean, think about it. That was something that I ate, didn't bother me, I ate as much as I wanted, ate it all the time. But now that's not good for me. And so I have to make an adjustment. And if I don't, I'm still going to not be getting the fruit or the result that I want. So he's saying, look, a good person, now listen, a good person is not just a good person for just because he's a good person. Why is he a good person? Because out of the good treasure in his heart, and we talk about that in the heart of the matter, where he talks about the verse about laying up in your heart the Torah. Okay? So you have to put that in, but you also have to do a cleanse. A lot of people into health will do a cleanse. You got to cleanse and purge all that other stuff out. You got to get that stuff out of your system. He says, then you can produce good fruit, because it comes out of the abundance of what's in your heart, which is the stuff that you have passion and emotions connected to. It has to be out of your emotional place. Action almost always is coming out of an emotional place. It's not just I had a thought and I took an action. I had a thought that an emotion quickly attached to because it's something I already knew I liked or didn't like, and then an action takes place. If you've got a button or a trigger, you know how that happens, right? The thought to action is almost, you can't even measure the amount of time. You think, well, how was there enough time for the emotion? The emotion was ready to be triggered like a landmine. Just go, chick, and boom, explode. But that's because it was already set in your heart, ready, waiting for someone to hit that little switch. Get rid of all the landmines and you don't have any of those problems. Clean that all out, you know? Get an emotional minesweeper, just sweep it all out. Because he says, look, good people and wicked people are not good and wicked just for whatever reason we might want to decide. It has to do with what they've put or the treasures that are in their heart. Because out of that comes the action. And the action is what determines whether they're good or wicked, right? Because we know that good, Billy was talking about this in his teaching, good is anything we do that's in line with the way he intended and designed it to be. So he designed us to be Torah observant. So when you keep commandments, that's good. Wicked is any time that you go against how he designed things to be. He didn't design you to eat shellfish and pork. So when you eat shellfish and pork, that's wicked. He didn't design you to keep Sunday, he designed you to keep Saturday, so that's wicked. He didn't design you to keep Christmas, Easter, whatever. He designed you to keep the holy days. When you do the one, that's wicked. When you do the other, that's good. It's not about, arbitrary decisions. That's his definition. But if you treasure up stuff that's not in line with how he wanted it, intended, and designed it, you can only bring forth wicked fruit. But when you put in from the above, the thinking, the mindset of Yeshua, when you disciple with the above, you're putting all that in there, your behavior is going to mimic the above. And so you're going to bear good fruit. Amen? He says, verse 46, we'll finish this chapter here. But why do you call me master, master? Do not do what I say. See, now that's going back to nobody's above their teacher. He says, you call me master, master. That's a waste of time if you're not going to do what I say. People walk around going, well, that's my rabbi, but do you do what I say? All right? Do you even come in and counsel? He says, don't call me that if you're not going to do what I say. What's the point? Are you wasting words? He says, everyone who's coming to me and is hearing my words and is doing them, I shall show you whom he's like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when a flood came and the stream burst against the house, but was unable to shake it, for it was founded on the rock. But the one hearing and not doing is like a man who built his house on the earth without foundation, against which the stream burst, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of the house was great. So what is he saying? A couple of things. One is, you're building something. I mean, he's using a metaphor, but you're building a life. You're building you. He tells you, do you not know that you are the tabernacle of the living Elohim? The Ruach dwells in you. So you're building this. Listen to the follow the pattern teaching. You're supposed to build this the same according to the pattern shown on the mountain, just like the tabernacle. Now he's saying here, look though, this is a real key piece. You're going to have a flood come and streams burst and attacks. There's going to be things that are going to see what kind of ground you are. In this case, it's not ground, it's what kind of house you built. Okay? We have other metaphors like he does the parable of the ground, right? When he talks about the parable of the sower and the seed. This is the exact same parable. You build it on a solid foundation, everything comes booming against it, it's fine. You don't build it on a foundation, it's going to go and great will the fall be. But notice what the problem is. Listening and doing. Hearing and doing. Shema. He says if you're going to Shema, you're going to be fine. If you're not, and by the way, he's also talking about people that they're claiming to be what they're not. Oh yeah, Lord, Lord, Master, Master, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. Just like the guys when he said, you call me Master, Master, he said, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. He said, I don't know you. Oh yeah, we're best friends. Oh yeah, Master, Master. Look, you want to be in a relationship with him, that relationship is based on hearing and doing. It's called covenant. Go listen to Are You Covenanted, all 55 parts, because you need to hear all 55 parts. All right? And then you'll understand. This is no joke, though. You are building a house. The flood is going to come. The stream is going to burst. And your house is either going to stand or it will be great, will be the ruin of it. Your choice. What do you need to do? You need to lay these things up in your heart. We're going to talk about this next week when we get into Ephesians. All right, we have to imitate him. At some point, we have to take this with more, I don't want to say things. I don't want to say you're not serious. You're not full of seriousness. In other words, you're serious in some aspects, in some ways. You need to be to the bone serious about every piece of this. That means the teachers, the commandments, all the details, your heart, your mind, the above and the below. All you have to. I'm not saying you're not serious. Most of you I know are very serious, but you've got blind spots and you've got gaps in your serious. It's like building the wall. Like Trump was building a wall, but there's big holes in the wall because they didn't finish it because whatever. Well, guess what? You've got holes in your wall. Okay? So it's not that you're not serious, but I'm not sure you understand all the things that actually are your responsibility. You want to figure out what you think everybody else's responsibility, but you're not owning yours enough. So everything we just talked about in this teaching, look for where you are in this thing. How am I looking at teachers? How am I looking at myself? What's in my heart? How am I thinking? How am I looking at other people? All the things I covered, you don't look about, oh, I wish so-and-so was here to hear that. No, you. I hit every one of you with something. There's zero possibility that anybody that heard this didn't get hit with something. If you didn't, you weren't listening. You were trying to hear other things for other people. And there's a pride problem. We need to get serious about all aspects of what he's teaching us in his word. Amen? Amen. Father, we come before you, and Father, we just want to come to you humbly, recognizing that we have to overcome our pride and start to accept the fact that we have toxicities, we have blind spots, we have weaknesses. Certainly we have plenty of planks blocking our vision so that it's hard to see, which affects our integrity, it affects our walk. Father, help us to come in total humility and ask you to show us all of those weaknesses, blind spots, areas that we're not really serious enough in, areas where we may be usurping or judging or not respecting authorities or whatever it may be, so that, Father, that we can become truly your disciples through the process, like Yeshua was yours, then the disciples were his, all the way down the chain as we learn to imitate and trust the structure. So, Father, we want to thank you for your patience and your love and for showing us and teaching us through the word how we are to love you and how we are to love each other. Because after all, in the future that we're looking forward to, that's all that's there, you and us. And so we have to figure this out. But thankfully, Father, and we really appreciate it, you give us an instruction manual that explains it all, and you provide us with teachers that can help encourage us to understand the instruction manual. So, Father, we thank you, praise you, giving you all glory and honor in the name above all names, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Amen.